Study Section 6. Product Differentiation and Monopolistic Competition. Introduction. Monopoly profits rarely go uncontested. A firm making high profits normally attracts competitors. Thus, situations of pure monopoly are rare in practice. Instead, the usual market structure in industries characterized by international economies of scale is one of oligopoly. Take 2 is one of oligopoly. Several firms, each of them large enough to affect prices, but none with an uncontested monopoly. The general analysis of oligopoly is a complex and controversial subject because in oligopolies, the pricing policies of firms are interdependent. Each firm in an oligopoly will, in setting its price, consider not only the responses of consumers but also the expected responses of competitors. These responses, however, depend in turn on the competitors' expectations about the firm's behavior, and this therefore is a complex game in which firms are trying to second-guess each other's strategies. Since 1980, monopolistic competition models have been widely applied to international trade. The general problems of modeling oligopoly below are discussed in this section. Monopolistic competition. In monopolistic competition models, two key assumptions are made to get around the problem of interdependence. They are, first, each firm assumed to be able to differentiate its product from that of its rivals. That is, because they want to buy this firm's particular product, the firm's customers will not rush to buy other firms' products because of a slight price difference. Secondly, each firm is assumed to take the prices changed by its rivals as given, that is, it ignores the impact of its own price on the prices of other firms. As a result, the monopolistic competition model assumes that even though each firm is in reality facing competition from other firms, it behaves as if it were a monopolist. Take 2. As if it were a monopolist, hence the model's name. Are there any monopolistically competitive industries in the real world? Some industries may be reasonable approximations. For example, the telecommunication industry in Nigeria, where a number of major producers, MTN, Globacom, Telecommunication, Zain, and Etisalat, offer substantially different yet nonetheless competing services, may be fairly well described by monopolistically competitive assumptions. The main appeal of the monopolistic competition model is not, however, its realism, but its simplicity. As we will see in the next section of this chapter, the monopolistic competition model gives us a very clear view of how economies of scale can give rise to mutually beneficial trade. Before we can examine trade, however, we need to develop a basic model of monopolistic competition. Let us therefore imagine an industry consisting of a number of firms. These firms produce differentiated products, that is, goods that are not exactly the same but that are substitutes for one another. Each firm is therefore a monopolist in the sense that it is the only firm producing its particular good, but the demand for its good depends on the number of other similar products available and on the prices of other firms in the industry. Assumptions of the model. We begin by describing the demand facing a typical monopolistically competitive firm. In general, we would expect a firm to sell more the larger the total demand for its industry's product and the higher the prices charged by its rivals. On the other hand, we expect the firm to sell less the greater the number of firms in the industry and the higher its own price. A particular equation for the demand facing a firm that has these properties is where Q is the firm's sales, S is the total sales of the industry, N the number of firms in the industry, B a constant term representing the responsiveness of a firm's sales to its price, P the price charged by the firm itself, and P, the average price charged by its competitors. Equation 6.1 may be given the following intuitive justification. If all firms charge the same price, each will have a market share. Vn, a firm charging more than the average of other firms will have a smaller market share, a firm charging less a larger share. It is helpful to assume that total industry sales S are unaffected by the average price P charged by firms in the industry. That is, we assume that firms can gain customers only at each other's expense. This is an unrealistic assumption, but it simplifies the analysis and helps focus on the competition among firms. In particular, it means that S is a measure of the size of the market, and that if all firms charge the same price, each sells S units. Next, we turn to the cost of a typical firm. Market equilibrium. To model the behavior of this monopolistically competitive industry, we will assume that all firms in this industry are symmetric, that is, the demand function and cost function are identical for all firms, even though they are producing and selling somewhat differentiated products. When the individual firms are symmetric, the state of the industry can be described without enumerating the features of all firms in detail. All we really need to know to describe the industry is how many firms are there and what price the typical firm charges. To analyze the industry, for example, to assess the effect of international trade, we need to determine the number of firms, N, and the average price they charge, P. Once we have a method for determining N and P, we can ask how they are affected by international trade. Our method for determining N and P involves 3 steps. First, we derive a relationship between the number of firms and the average cost of a typical firm. We show that this relationship is upward sloping, that is, the more firms there are, the lower the output of each firm, and thus the higher its cost per unit of output. Next is the relationship between the number of firms and the price each firm charges, which must equal P in equilibrium. This relationship is downward sloping. The more firms there are, the more intense is competition among firms, and as a result, the lower the prices they charge. Finally, we argue that when the price exceeds average cost, additional firms will enter the industry, while when the price is less than average cost, firms will exit. So, in the long run, the number of firms is determined by the intersection of the curve that relates average cost to N and the curve that relates price to N. This is the end of study section 6. Thanks for listening.